I was recently contacted by a man named Dr. Dan Villiers, who is a psychologist, and he claimed to have been out to Skinwalker Ranch. He asked me if I wanted to do an interview with the owner of Skinwalker Ranch and himself, Brandon Fugal. So I agreed. We set up this interview. So it's me, Dr. Dan Villiers, and Brandon Fugal, who again is the owner of Skinwalker Ranch and runner of the hit show on the History Channel, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which is entering its 5th season. You can check out the episodes now. So, came on, we talked about a lot of things. I got to ask Brandon about the famous picture with Sean Kirkpatrick and this meeting that supposedly never took place, all occurring during this Stephen Greenstreet report, who was a journalist for the New York Post. I also got to ask him about another Stephen Greenstreet report where he followed Brandon Fugal around in Utah and Skinwalker Ranch and supposedly debunked it, right? So we get Brandon's thoughts on that. And also, while we were in the middle of our interview, it was confirmed there was a new UAP Disclosure Act presented. It was co-sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, right? And in it was still this term, eminent domain. So apparently Brandon and his team do have an issue with that piece of verbiage in the legislation. So I get his opinion on it because a lot of people have commented on it. They've kind of gone back and forth. So that was great. And then at the very end of the interview, Dr. Dan Villiers reveals an experience that he had in 2015 for the first time ever. And he shows some photos that he took of the incident. Now, Brandon nor myself had ever heard this before, so you get our real-time reaction to this. It's a phenomenal conversation. I really enjoyed having both these gentlemen on and being able to talk about the phenomena openly as we did, and we just had a great conversation. So please sit back and enjoy this interview with Dr. Dan Villiers and Brandon Fugal, owner of Skinwalker Ranch. Enjoy. I live inside my own world. Welcome to Vetted. I have two very special guests with me today. Brandon Fugal, owner of Skinwalker Ranch. Super excited to have him here. As well as Dr. Dan. Dan, how do I say your last name? Villiers? Villiers? Yep. I want to say it
Villiers.
right. Villiers. Villiers. Okay. I didn't know if it had a French little,
there is a French way to pronounce it,
okay.
But it's a little snobby. It's like Villiers, but I would never expect that. So
does that sound pretentious if you're not French and you kind of give your name a French? Like, is that how that works?
Yeah,
I don't
maybe.
know. Well, thank you guys for joining us, man. So excited to have you guys on Vetted.
It's good to be with you. Thank you so much, Patrick. Let's dive in.
I love it. That's my kind of attitude. I'm an ex-chef, so I say cut the fat. Let's get going with this. Look, I think one quick thing just to start us off on a fun fact here. For me, I've never seen anyone bring this up, but in the show Skinwalker Ranch, you have a gentleman named Thomas Winterton, right? Love this guy. Okay, yeah. Super great guy. But I noticed something. He looks just like Stephen Greenstreet. Are they twins? Like they're like twins from another. Have you guys ever noticed that? I've seen videos where I confuse them.
Oh gosh, Tom would be so offended right now.
I know he would be, and I don't mean it as an insult. I promise. I promise. No. I don't.
You know, it's probably kind of the mustache sometimes, and some of the hair scruff. But interesting observation. Well, and couldn't be two more different people. It's interesting to see, Thomas Winterton has grown so much through his experience as being the manager and superintendent of Skinwalker Ranch over the course of the last, going on 8 years here. He actually engaged with me in April of 2016, within days of acquiring the property. I needed to bring someone on that I could trust, that could help tackle some of the physical facilities issues that I was encountering right off the bat relative to the property, and someone that could help us construct the scientific platforms and that which would help us bring, I think, another level of professionalism to the investigation. And Thomas, being a general contractor, entrepreneur, and lifelong resident of the Uinta Basin, who lives just minutes away, was perfect for the job. And it's been great to have him as part of not only the journey from that first month of acquiring the property as a skeptic, but also as a key participant on The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, our landmark docuseries, which is in our 5th season right now airing. We just dropped on Disney Plus. Our 3rd season just dropped on Netflix, and we have a global following that is thankfully part of our ongoing journey into frontier science topics that are quite unique. So yeah, Thomas is an incredible supporter and a longtime team member who has been with the property really since my stewardship commenced.
No, that's
I
awesome.
heard
He's
2006.
Oh, go ahead, Dan, please. I just want to say real quick, my
go
favorite guy on the show, Thomas is. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
If I'm allowed to pick favorites, I just love Thomas on the show.
He's a man's man. I mean, the guy,
yeah,
he's the MacGyver.
Great.
If you need stuff done, you need to get stuff done on the ranch. Thomas just figures out a way. And usually most of the time it's collaborating with Dr. Taylor and Eric Bard. I mean, Eric Bard is the principal investigator, the chief scientist, and comes up with virtually all of the elaborate scientific platforms and monitoring systems relative to the 512 acres that is Skinwalker Ranch. But Thomas Winterton helps implement those platforms and really make it a reality in concert with the direction he receives from the scientists. So we have an incredible team. And I think by design, I've wanted to have from the beginning a multidisciplinary team of experts, not just a bunch of egghead scientists and not a bunch of security professionals or former military. I wanted a diverse range of talent, perspective, and subject matter expertise that would be coming from different directions to help us really tackle these topics and get some answers as to what is really happening on this enigmatic piece of property.
Yeah, totally agree. Love that attitude. Dr. Dan, sorry, please.
Oh, no, I was just, I heard 2016, and, for me, a lot of my interest sort of stemmed, from my experience in 2015, but kind of legitimized by the 2017 New York Times article and all the sort of releases that came after that. But interesting timing, right? That you purchased or acquired that property prior to that big release. I don't know. It's just fortuitous almost.
There are no coincidences, Dr. Dan. What I've found, the older I get, I do not believe in coincidences. I think everything is connected, and that there is some intelligent design to our lives and what is happening and unfolding before our very eyes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Brandon, I was going to ask you this. Speaking of Stephen Greenstreet, I had my own sort of falling out, I guess, with Vetted as well, with him. And something I noticed about the videos that he made about Skinwalker Ranch is that I'm curious what you think about it, is that he claimed to have debunked the entire phenomena at this property by going for one overnight stay. And I just that seems like a weird house to build on, right? Like a weird foundation to build on. So I'm curious your thoughts, how that whole investigation came out.
Yeah, it was neither scientific or had any journalistic integrity. I mean, in journalism, you fully vet your sources. You come from an objective point of view, and you're supposed to look at all sides. You're supposed to look at all of the data and present the truth and the facts. And Mr. Greenstreet unfortunately chose to not only avoid but completely discard any facts, any data that did not fit his negative narrative. I thought it was interesting that he completely ignored the testimony of former law enforcement and other professionals that had reported incidents on the property going back decades, long before my investigation or brought Bob Bigelow or Sherman's bought it, going back to the original couple that owned it at least since the 1940s, the Myers. Kenneth and Edith Myers had a long relationship with Deputy Sheriff Chris Porritt, who repeatedly came out to the property in response to everything from bizarre cattle mutilation events that occurred, to UFO events, to other unexplainable incidents that were quite disturbing, and to just simply dismiss the testimony, the firsthand testimony of law enforcement and also other neighbors. I mean, neighbors that have been there for generations, that have had experiences. And then you couple with that the data and the evidence presented by third-party subject matter experts, everyone from astronomers to FLIR camera experts to, I think, some of the most credible surveyors in the world when it comes to instrumented rockets, balloons, drones, and other platforms that have been utilized in service to understanding what is happening both above and below this mysterious piece of property. To just summarily dismiss anything that would not support a negative narrative is nothing more than confirmation bias. And it's the same type of blind ignorance that those who bring skeptical thinking or critical thinking to the table accuse the so-called believers of. And I think it takes a very balanced approach. What you saw with the New York Post series with Mr. Greenstreet was at first balanced. At least it seemed balanced in his portrayal of me and shadowing me and documenting the history of my life and my career and the steps that brought me to acquire Skinwalker Ranch. But it quickly went off the rails as it relates to actually reporting and reviewing and analyzing the countless events that have been documented now going on 7 years under my investigation, or now 8 years rather. So it's a little bit frustrating, but it's par for the course. We're dealing with very controversial frontier topics, and it's no surprise that people take very different approaches when trying to process the reality of these topics and these events.
Brandon, you didn't have to bring him to the ranch. I mean, I thought that was really good of you to sort of, allow him to come. I know probably some of your colleagues there were maybe saying, hey, maybe not to do this.
But Travis Taylor wouldn't go, right?
No, everyone. There wasn't one person who agreed with me bringing him out to the property or even shadowing me for several days. Everyone thought it was a bad idea. I'm not that way. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And my arrangement with Mr. Greenstreet was just simply that he'd tell the truth, that he would present the facts, let the data speak for itself, and let the chips fall. I had nothing to hide and have nothing to hide relative to my life and my ownership of this property and our investigation. And I'm quite proud of what we have documented and presented, and the team that surrounds me and supports this effort. I think it's unfortunate, again, when people bring that level of confirmation bias or lack of integrity to the table, and it's just one of many chapters and learning experiences relative to this property. All that being said, the funny thing was I really loved meeting with Mr. Greenstreet. I loved meeting with Stephen and having him shadow me for a couple of days. I gave him a big hug, genuinely, at the end of our visit, and I truly felt that there was a kindred spirit, that there was a friendship there that could very well help us document and tell the story of what was happening relative to the ranch and our collective experiences. But he and I have a lot in common as far as some of our cultural upbringing and backgrounds, and I felt we had a lot of common ground. And I think that's the case with most people on this planet. I think we find that we have so much more in common than not. And as long as we operate from a place of truth and trying to find that common ground and looking to people's best intentions, I think we're always going to end up on top. And things don't always work out, in a perfect fashion. And with that interview and that series, it took a bit of a negative turn, but even still, going back, I appreciated the opportunity to get to know Stephen and to be able to tell my story. And I'm excited and proud about what we're doing and what we're documenting. All of this in the midst of also commanding the commercial real estate market and working on hundreds of projects. So the ranch project, I think it's important to note for your viewers, only really comprises about 5% of my overall bandwidth or time. About 95% of my focus remains on business, on conventional business, primarily commercial real estate, as chairman of Colliers International's Intermountain operation, and as an investor, developer, and entrepreneur and angel investor. I remain active in every sector of our community, and I love working on various community initiatives. Skinwalker Ranch is a bit of a different project. It's not only the most unique real estate project, if you want to call it that, but it has led us down a path to exploring and discussing topics that people are sometimes unfamiliar with, or at least uncomfortable with. I mean, the idea that we're not alone in the universe, that there are craft of unknown origin, objects of unknown origin that are violating our airspace, and that negative things happen that are difficult to explain or defy any conventional explanation. I mean, these topics are not easy for a lot of people to digest and to address. I think most people, when it comes down to it, want to be plugged right back into the matrix, and they don't want to face anything that would challenge their paradigm or their predictable linear life. And it's understandable. I don't blame people for being not only skeptical, but sometimes hostile toward these topics.
Something else that I found interesting is kind of this arrow thing that came up with Sean Kirkpatrick and this report. He did this interview, and it's probably one of the funniest pictures I've seen since I've been running Vetted, is the picture you released after Sean Kirkpatrick said, I didn't go to any meeting with Brandon Fugal.
Yeah.
And then,
so
you threw out that picture, and he's got this look like the villain look. Like, I thought, oh my God, what a mic drop, Brandon. I was just like, bam, that was so good.
Yeah. Well, like someone's photographing me here. I can.
Yeah.
Well, here you have Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who was appointed the task of leading the most recent mandated review by Congress relative to these topics, the UFO phenomena and other high strangeness. And he goes on record with the New York Post stating that, number one, he'd never met me. He didn't even know who I was. He'd never met Brandon Fugal. Number two, he'd never attended a briefing relative to Skinwalker Ranch in his life. Number three, he stated unambiguously that he had no interest in these topics before 2022. And here we have a briefing in April of 2018. In April of 2018, we are summoned to Washington, D.C., to provide testimony to certain committees where he was in attendance. And we spent 2.5 hours in that briefing. And I sat right across from him. I mean, we're talking eye to eye, right across from each other for 2.5 hours. And that briefing was 100% specific to Skinwalker Ranch. It had, I think, about 55 very detailed slides in the keynote presentation that also included video and data documenting not only the reality of the UFO phenomena and sightings and activity on Skinwalker Ranch, but also acute medical episodes that have occurred and the documentation associated with those acute medical episodes, as well as electromagnetic anomalies and phenomena that seem to attend much of the activity, that provide a fingerprint, if you will. So Dr. Kirkpatrick, for whatever reason, has selective amnesia, that he'd never met me. pleaded ignorance, and that he'd never attended a briefing relative to Skinwalker Ranch, or never had any interest in these topics before 2022, yet he's attending a confidential briefing in Washington, D.C. that we had carefully orchestrated over weeks, that people had been given notice. This was very formal and very specific. And I didn't want to provide the picture. I didn't want to post a picture or any of the visual evidence that this briefing took place on social media, to be quite candid. In fact, I emailed Stephen Greenstreet and I said, what are you trying to do? Why are you pursuing this line of accusation? Are you trying to ruin this man's credibility? I have nothing against Dr. Kirkpatrick. I have no idea what his motives may be, what would lead him to claim that he never met me, never attended a briefing. I have no idea what kind of pressure this man is under. And yet you continue to push this agenda. And I pleaded with him. I said, please don't proceed with this. And yet they go ahead and they drop this story and essentially claim that I'm a liar, that I'm bearing false witness, and saying, well, who are you going to believe? You know, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, credentialed Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who's been assigned the task of leading the Arrow report and the comprehensive review of these topics? Or are you going to believe some real estate entrepreneur who owns some so-called spooky ranch in Utah? And that's the way that it was framed, and it pissed me off. I felt like it was not only dishonest, but it was hostile and it was inappropriate. So I was forced to post the receipts. I had to bring the receipts and show, A, the briefing really did take place, and it was specific to Skinwalker Ranch, and I posted images of the slides from that briefing. B, Dr. Kirkpatrick was not only there, but he was sitting right across from me, as evidenced by the photographic evidence that was taken. And C, there was great interest in these topics prior to 2022, going back to, at least specific to Skinwalker Ranch, going back to 2018 and before, that led up to being summoned to DC to give this briefing with my principal investigator, Eric Bard, Dr. Jim Segala, who'd been consulting with us for quite some time. Again, all of this predates any television docuseries. We hadn't had any discussions with the History Channel. We hadn't proceeded down this path of allowing the investigation to be documented. This was all private. My identity was absolutely secret, confidential, as the owner of the ranch. I wanted my name nowhere in the public domain attached to these topics. And I was providing this data and this evidence as a patriot, as someone who really does believe that people deserve to know the truth, and I love our country. If this is a foreign adversary, if this is China or Russia that has access to this technology and is deploying it on our soil, and creating phenomena that defy any natural explanation, then we're in big trouble. We are in big trouble. This is a concern that has national security.
The whole the statement that we all know the phenomenon is real, dispense with all that language, was that stated in that meeting by someone?
It was right there. It was framed at the beginning of the meeting, and I gave Mr. Greenstreet a true accounting of that. He ran with that. And then, of course, sometime later ends up having an interview with Dr. Kirkpatrick, who was charged with producing this report for Congress and for the Pentagon. And it's just an unfortunate series of events. I had no desire to try to discredit anyone, to call anyone's integrity into question. But when my integrity is called into question, when people are looking at me and saying that I'm just sensationalizing these topics and essentially just making these things up, I was forced into a position to bring the receipts, to demonstrate clearly that our effort not only is professional and has integrity, but a certain narrative, a negative narrative that has been put out there is absolutely false. And I don't know why. That's what I don't understand to this day is I don't know why. I'm baffled. Why not just own up to these topics, to these things being real, to even the meetings and even a relationship, an exchange having taken place? Why completely deny that? I still, to this day, will never understand. And I guess in the big scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. But what it does do, I hope, is it sends a message to those who are watching, those who care enough to pay attention, that there is a disinformation campaign, a very active disinformation campaign out there to try to discredit those people like me who are willing to put their reputations, their resources on the line in service to bring this forward. And I hope that in time that my legacy someday will be partially involved with bringing frontier topics to the forefront and helping us take an evolutionary leap as far as our understanding of the world around us and our place in the universe.
In essence, Kirkpatrick claimed to me that he had nothing to do with UFOs or the paranormal before his assignment to Arrow in 2022. But then I discovered he was at a 2018 briefing which featured a presentation about Skinwalker Ranch, a supposed UFO hotspot. Also in the briefing were various UFO and paranormal enthusiasts. So what the heck was Kirkpatrick doing there? UFO believers who don't like Kirkpatrick smelled blood. They took to social media to say my report proved Kirkpatrick was a liar. But he didn't actually lie about anything in my report. Sure, there were some outstanding questions and confusing statements.
Well, look, I think anyone can agree you did what you had to do, and I'm glad you did it.
It's
unfortunate. To be honest with you.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. I get your point. Like, it makes sense what you're saying, right? That's not what you were outing to do, but you were left with no choice. Like you said, the ranch was on the line. The people that work at the ranch were on the line. Your reputation was on the line. I get it.
It was really, really sad. And
sure.
I still, to this day, I don't understand. I don't understand the motivations. It's
Wait, Greenstreet's motivations? I mean,
yeah,
his motivations were
well, and why
clicks.
Completely try to discredit the truth? Why try to discredit events and activity that has data
you can easily prove? Yeah, exactly.
Actually has hard data proving its validity. It makes no sense other than, I mean, there are a number of, I guess, explanations you can point to, but it's really, really unfortunate. I mean, nevertheless, we continue. I mean, it's an interesting landscape that we find ourselves in right now, and I'm hopeful that you know, with moving ahead and presenting this to the general public, that others will come forward. You know, we live in a time where communication happens instantaneously, where with the push of a button, you can post whatever. You can post pictures, images, opinions, data. And it's a miracle that we live in a time of collaboration and discovery that I think will propel this world forward. It's quite an exciting thing to be part of it.
No,
I've got
awesome.
one question, Patrick. I hope it's okay.
Yeah,
I ask
go
it. To what level does the production company control kind of, you know, maybe media that you release or really good footage, maybe of sightings? Is there any kind of control of the pace and the content of what's released? Because, I don't know, maybe they want to kind of hold off to release it until a certain time, or how much control do you have versus
good question. Well, you know, we have thousands of hours of audio, video that is captured on an annual basis out there and then carefully edited and organized in order to present to the general public. My agreement from day one with the History Channel was that nothing can be faked, fabricated, or contrived. Everything has to be absolutely true that is presented. I don't want my name associated with anything that is false and fabricated. Number two, my other condition was that they had to use my team, and every one of my team members that had no television experience. In fact, they didn't want to be on television. Eric Bard still despises it. My principal investigator, I think, has never forgiven me for putting him on television. And he's continually pissed off about it. The only person that had any experience was Dr. Taylor, who was introduced to us by the History Channel as an independent, credentialed physicist who had done work with NASA, Army intelligence, and the federal government relative to space-based technologies and a number of programs that are classified. And they felt he would be great to bring out because he was a skeptic, for one. He was a very outspoken skeptic relative to these topics before he entered Skinwalker Ranch and went down this rabbit hole, if you will, with us. And he was also someone with unusual credentials. I mean, the guy has 2 PhDs in physics. He has 3 master's degrees. His references, his bona fides are impeccable and unimpeachable, in my view. And the fact that he did come out as a skeptic, as someone who is questioning the validity of these claims, of this activity, I think underscores how legitimate and how authentic and genuine this whole effort is. The general public have been able to see through his eyes this transformation from being a skeptic to not just a believer, but an experiencer. And he's gone through
Doesn't everyone start out as a skeptic, though?
Excuse me?
Doesn't everyone start out as a skeptic? Maybe not. I don't know.
No.
There's just some people that are just more prone.
I think there are a lot of people who desperately want to believe, that give the benefit of the doubt and start off as believers, and many of them, even when faced with evidence that what they're believing in is not true or doesn't have any credibility or validity, still cling desperately to that idea, to that belief system. Yeah. I think it's human nature. It's human nature to want to have the answers, to want to know our place in the universe, to want to believe that there is order, that there is a higher purpose to our existence. That's been demonstrated since the beginning of time, or at least recorded history. But bringing scientific evidence and data to the table that actually proves, that demonstrates that our reality is much more than it seems on the surface, that we truly aren't alone in the universe, that we are part of a divinely constructed, intelligently designed reality. Showing the data that demonstrates that there is validity, to those beliefs or those statements is quite another leap and quite another thing. And I think that's a big part of what pushes and advances our effort at Skinwalker Ranch.
Look, right before we jumped on this interview, there was word that the new, or what are they calling it, the UAPDA or whatever, this new law, right, that they're trying to pass, the UAP Disclosure Act, right, that the House they just submitted it with Schumer as a co-sponsor. And apparently eminent domain is another part of this. And I know there's been some issues with that. And, I'm sure yourself, right? I'm having Danny Sheehan on Tuesday to talk to him about this, because I know he's made some comments about Jay Stratton, Travis Taylor, and eminent domain, and how they don't necessarily support it. I can see both sides. I see the side that I've heard Dr. Travis Taylor bring up some points about it, and then I've heard the other side of what Danny Sheehan has said. Where do you fall on this, and how do you feel about this?
I'm concerned. I share many of Dr. Taylor's concerns relative to sweeping eminent domain authority. That government entities could just come in immediately and take away anything and snatch up anything that they deem to be justified.
Sure. Where's that line, right? Where's the line? It sounds nice,
here's the
but
thing.
where's
that line? When you have a privately funded effort like ours, a 100% privately funded investigation involving credentialed third-party experts, and the threat that what we are trying to present to the public transparently could be undermined or could be completely hijacked by some sweeping, ignorant, eminent domain legislation that hasn't been properly thought through, that hasn't been properly vetted. I do have a concern with that. I also think that it's a bit laughable that everyone thinks that congressional hearings and FOIA requests and any number of calls for disclosure are going to result in any such disclosure. I believe that these topics have been sequestered away into special compartmented access programs for decades. We're talking 70 years or more.
Yeah.
And if you don't think that the military industrial complex and parties that have had access to this data and have controlled it and have also waged a disinformation campaign involving the media, the government, the defense and aerospace sector, if you don't think that they're all highly invested in ensuring that these topics don't come out, that they don't have a light shown on them, you've got another thing coming. And I think it's ignorance for people to think that you're going to see any level of disclosure or truth out of the federal government. And I know that sounds very skeptical. That sounds very cynical on my part, but
I agree.
I also don't think that the government is really the greatest example of innovation or frontier science expansion or disruption.
One thing I think they've got right, though, as a psychologist, I think I can speak to this, is that they have a fear or concern of how the general public is going to cope with disclosure and the news.
Right.
And you'll hear people say, oh, it'll be tough for a couple of days, but we'll just get back on, to family life and work life. But in reality, I think it's going to be more than existential shock. I think it could really kind of unravel people's lives. 50% of this country are strong religious believers, whether evangelical Christians. I went from a really strong believer. I was baptized at 32 years old, and I kind of lost my faith in 2015 to 17 after I had my experience. And then when I heard off, all this news, and I've tried to find a way to, okay, how can my faith kind of merge with the phenomenon? But it was really unsettling. And that's me being educated psychologist. Yeah. Maybe that doesn't matter, but I think a lot of people would struggle with it more than they might know.
But maybe not. I was raised to believe that we live in a universe where there are worlds without number, where we do live in a divinely constructed, intelligently designed reality. We're not alone. And I think it's perfectly consistent with Christian tradition. In fact, it's, I was raised within, and I'm a believer in the Church of Jesus Christ, the Latter-day Saints. And I believe that the religious framework that I was raised in, served as a missionary in, and have also raised my own children in, is not inconsistent or out of alignment with the cosmic worldview, that we're not alone, and that there is a greater picture relative to our existence that is divinely guided and constructed. And so I think that if people look at these topics through the appropriate lens and approach these topics with a measure of, I think, not only due diligence, but also with an open mind, I think that it can be quite enlightening and transformational. But we are dealing with topics, and we're dealing with, at the ranch, we're dealing with phenomena that in many cases is disturbing. And I understand that and want to be sensitive to that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get it. Do you find yourself like wanting to fight this, these laws about eminent domain, or just take that part out? Or I get your point. I don't like giving I live in Texas. I'm about, giving the government the least amount of power as possible. I so I'm with you. Like, but I get the other side. I think, what it comes from is just a desire to want the truth and this evidence to supposedly that the government has so bad that, you're kind of willing to put some blinders on, but you don't see the full ramifications of enacting an act like you're mentioning, right? What is,
you
how are we going to open this can of worms of eminent domain? Where does it stop? Where do we go with this? Right. So I get your point.
And how is that going to allow the truth to come forward?
I agree. What does that even mean? You're right.
How is granting the federal government sweeping eminent domain power and authority going to ensure that the truth comes forward?
In fact, it will get buried deeper, if you ask me.
Yeah. Are people that stupid? I mean,
yeah.
I don't understand. I don't know. It's Saturday, so I don't have much of a filter.
No, you're speaking real. This is real talk. Like, I get your point, and a lot of people do get your point. I'm the other way around. I need to be convinced of that eminent domain, and I have yet to hear a good argument that would make me want to support that, because I'm with you. I don't even own a ranch with spooky stuff on it, and I still agree with you, right? Like, where does that stop? Where does the government go? Again, I think it would get buried, deeper. So the truth, I mean, but regardless, something I've always been curious about, Brandon. Then Dr. Dan, I do want to get to your story right after this. So this is basically my last question. I was thinking about, Brandon, you took over Skinwalker Ranch famously, right, from Bigelow Airspace, right? He had it for a couple decades, I think, right?
20 years.
Right?
Yeah,
20 years or so.
Bob Bigelow, elusive billionaire, real estate magnate, aerospace entrepreneur. It's really leading the private space race to a large degree in his capacity as really the CEO and founder of Bigelow Aerospace, that has acquired the Space Habitats program from NASA, to put inflatable technology in place, up not only to replace the International Space Station, but also create environments on the lunar surface, on the moon's surface, as well as Mars and beyond. I think it's an incredible, inspiring person. I love Bob Bigelow and his enthusiasm, and the fact that he puts his money where his mouth is relative to these topics. And so there you have someone who, from 1996, when he bought the ranch, to 2016, when he sold it to me, had funded with millions of dollars out of his own pocket a private science investigation involving an arsenal of technologies and scientists, and then he ends up partnering with the U.S. government under a program called BASS, BAASS, that was a Pentagon-funded black budget program exploring these topics and using the ranch as base camp, as a center of gravity. Well, that project, as we know, was funded with tens of millions of dollars, and it spanned years and was ultimately terminated. And within 2 years of that project being terminated, certain individuals reached out to me who were advising Mr. Bigelow with the opportunity to meet and explore the potential of purchasing this ranch and transitioning the stewardship of this very mysterious property. And that leads us to where we're at today. It's an interesting road.
My question was always, if it had so much phenomena, why would he get rid of it?
Well, he had some negative things happen. Bad things happened to him and his family. If you've ever heard of something called the hitchhiker effect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People associated with the ranch that have visited the ranch and conducted research there, in many cases have ended up reporting that phenomena follows them home and terrorizes their family members and creates all sorts of disruption. in their home environment. And I think Bob Bigelow was one of those that experienced some negativity. I also think that he has demonstrated a great interest in topics relative to consciousness that are related.
I find that fascinating. Yeah,
fascinating. And I think who knows exactly really what the ultimate agenda was, but I'm thankful for the opportunity, the stewardship. Even though I bought it as a skeptic, I'd never seen a ghost or a UFO or anything of the sort. I'd gone through a faith crisis, much like Dr. Dan. That's something that Dan and I here share. Is, you know, I went through a faith crisis at a time before purchasing Skinwalker Ranch that had me questioning not only my faith, but really whether there was anything, you know, divine that you could believe in. I was questioning the foundations of the faith that I was raised in, that I taught to others, and it was a challenging time. And so here I purchased the ranch as someone who's struggling with his faith privately, who also did not want his name. I did not want my name associated with these topics, because I did not want any purchase of this controversial piece of property to call my integrity or my credibility into question as the owner of the largest commercial real estate enterprise in the Intermountain West. I didn't want to be weaponized or used against me, which, by the way, it has. Since going public, I've had competitors. Yeah, I've had competitors that have used it as a source of ridicule to tear me down and to try to question, or at least cause my clients to question working with me, which is just shameful, just pathetic, weak, disgusting.
That means they're scared of you. If you think about it, right? Competitively, that's where you go competitively. Yeah. If you got nothing else on the guy, right? They go, oh, don't go into business with this guy.
Yeah.
He's got, right? I mean, wow, that's
it's
crazy.
Just unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But I knew that I would be taking a great risk when I went public in 2020. So I went public in March of 2020 with my identity as the owner of Skinwalker Ranch. And then we proceeded to unveil the groundbreaking docuseries that I believe in the first 20 minutes showed more evidence relative to not only the reality of the phenomena, but that which was happening at Skinwalker Ranch. More evidence had been presented in the first 20 minutes of my docuseries than had been presented in decades. And the ability to use that medium to not only help the public take this journey with us, but to disseminate the data and the evidence relative to these topics has been a great privilege. It's been a key part of my stewardship, very unexpected part, but a key part of what has driven me. And I believe that this stewardship requires me to transparently engage with the public and to present the truth of what we are experiencing and documenting. I take this responsibility very seriously.
And it shows. No, I love the show. Dr. Dan, Brandon's going to have to leave here pretty soon, so I wanted to make sure to give you time to share this. I don't want to rush you. I want to give you your time. Apparently, Brandon, you've never heard this either, so this will be new for you as well.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah, I mean, Brandon, I think we were in the car going from one office to the other, and I shared a bit of it, and I showed some photos. Unfortunately, the photos don't reveal the full experience of what happened, but I'll give you sort of a synopsis of what happened. So this was 2015. I was currently working in a treatment center that I founded. It was a residential treatment center. I was also a researcher and an adjunct professor at Dartmouth College, and kind of established in the Upper Valley community, as we call it, in New Hampshire, and as a scientist researcher, and which was one of the reasons why I did not talk about what happened, which was in 2015. It was, I'd have to look up the date. It's sort of mid-May, about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and I was staying at this the Hampton Inn motel. I was a smoker back in those days, and for 5 years after that, but I'm currently quit. But outside the hotel having a cigarette, and I look up in the sky and I see this, what I thought was a star, but quite a bright star, and sort of early in the evening, you know, summer, that time of the world, stars don't come out till late. It's light till late at night. But then the star got bigger and closer to me, and to the point where it came, and I can't really assess the distance, but I would say I'm a golfer, so I could kind of say between 300 and 500 yards.
Oh, wow.
So to like 200 to 300 yards, and then go back to maybe 500 to 1,000 yards. And when it came close to me, I could see, and the best way to describe it, it was sort of an orb, but you could see the sort of definition. You could see an outline of this light, but it emanated energy. And when it was closer to me, at the 300-yard mark, the sound, there was a very sort of prominent sound slash feel, and it really reminded me of growing up in England. We lived near these power lines, and if you were underneath these huge sort of power lines, there was this sort of electric buzz that you would kind of feel. That was very much the feeling of when it was close. And so it went away 3 or 4 times, 5 seconds, be close, then move away 5 seconds, not at some great rate of speed, but fast, I would still say. And don't have my phone, don't have a camera. I race up to my room, grab my iPhone 7, 6, I can't even remember what number it was back then. Got 5 or 6 photos, but at that point it had moved away, maybe 2,000 yards at that point, but it was still moving. And then the last photo I got was right in between these mountains, and I actually have the photos, and I can sort of email them to you if you want to post them.
Please,
but then it
please.
shot off through the mountain range at a very high speed. So that's not the most interesting part of the story. Of course, I wish I got video of the first half of it, but I do not have that. But later that night, I wake up and I have eye pain. And the best thing I can kind of equate it to is when I was skiing in the Pyrenees for one day. We were in sort of the Gers, the region of southern France, and we went down to the Pyrenees to ski for a day, and I didn't have sunblock. And so I skied out there with no sunblock for a day. And that night I couldn't see. I lost vision for basically 24 hours, and that can happen. I guess it's called sun blindness. But that night of, I think it was May 15th, I didn't have full sort of blindness, but I had orbital pain, sensitivity, as if I had basically had just a massive dose of sun. I can't say it's radiation. I don't know what it was, but for days, that sort of significant pain around my eyes, and thought about it a lot. You know, I mean, it's hard not to. And didn't really, I mean, immediately called my girlfriend, who is my current wife, and told her about it. But other than that, I didn't really share it with anyone because I was nervous to. But that's really when my interest started, and this was years before. Obviously, I saw the phenomenon, which, you know, me seeing James Fox's The Phenomenon, the New York Times article, that's when I sort of start, well, maybe I can kind of talk about this, but I still want to be careful. And then I go out and spend 2 days with Brandon. And then for some reason, I felt like emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, I feel like I can share more freely.
Love that. That's so cool.
Yeah. But this is actually the first time I'm sort of sharing the story.
That's very great.
This is the first time.
You.
Right.
I really applaud Dr. Dan's courage, because you're putting your reputation and yourself right out there on the line in providing testimony that you're not just a believer. you're an experiencer. You had an experience that you cannot unsee, that had a profound impact on you and has opened up a path where you've been driven to conduct your due diligence, to consult with other experiencers, and to look at the data. I'd mentioned earlier, I bought the ranch as a skeptic, as someone who is going through a faith crisis as well. Yeah. And I will tell you that the journey that I've been on over the course of the last 8 years has been transformational. I've not only gone from being a skeptic to an experiencer with multiple witnesses. I mean, I feel bad for Dr. Dan because he didn't have the benefit of multiple witnesses standing at his side that actually saw what he was seeing and can bear testimony to that and went on record. I was fortunate that I had witnesses at my side. And on the same day that I witnessed what can only be described as a flying saucer on October 14th, 2016, 6 months into owning it, a flying saucer-like object that was suspended above the mesa and conducted maneuvers that defied any explanation, that was witnessed by myself and others sitting there with me that I'd never met before that day, I have not consulted with after. You couple with that the fact that there was an acute medical episode that occurred prior to the event and electromagnetic anomalies that were documented that occurred. I mean, you combine all of that and all of those data points, and it's a game-changing experience and set of observations and data points that have led me down this road. And the one thing that has happened along with this is I've gone back and reevaluated my faith. I've looked at what I believe and why I believe, the way I do. And I have had a similar transformational experience relative to finding my way back to my faith and having a renewed and I think very inspired point of view that has restored that. In fact, I feel like my faith in a higher power, my faith in God, in my Savior, in the fact that there is a plan of happiness for all of us, that we are part of a divinely constructed, intelligently designed reality, that faith has been strengthened through my experiences over the course of the last 8 years. And I can't deny that my stewardship of Skinwalker Ranch has probably informed that journey along the way. And I think we're just getting warmed up. So what you're seeing so far, Patrick, Dan, what you're seeing so far presented to the general public on a weekly basis is, I believe, just scratching the surface. I mean, we are presenting, even this last week and coming up this next week, we are presenting, I believe, the most stunning, unambiguous, and unimpeachable data relative to the reality that we are not alone. And and you don't have to take my word for it. Don't even take my word for it. Take the countless third-party experts, the credentialed professionals who've put their own reputations, their own equipment on the line in service to helping us study the ranch. I mean, you've been seeing it unfolding if you're watching these things. I mean, we've had experts out there with millions of dollars worth of equipment that have been destroyed or at least dramatically disrupted as a result of their activities. But people have come out at great cost to not only their reputations potentially, but also the very scientific platforms and equipment that they rely on to make a living. And I have to applaud their efforts. I have to applaud their willingness to be part of this ongoing investigation because it's not for the faint of heart. And Patrick, thank you for hosting this discussion and this show. I believe that courageous reporters, journalists, podcasters that are willing to shine a light on these topics and are willing to take an objective point of view and let people bring forward their testimony and their experience and their data. I think it's important. and it's an incredible, inspiring time that we live in, gentlemen. Yeah, I couldn't be more humbled and honored to be a participant in all that's unfolding. And I think we really are just getting warmed up.
Well, you're more than a participant. You're a leader in this, Brandon, for sure. Whether or not you like that term or not, that's just the truth. You're up there. You're leading a big cause that, look, even Dr. Dan visiting you, it gave him the strength. I'm sure there was other things, but you hear things like that. That's got to be empowering to yourself.
Dr. Dan, the thing I loved, Dan saw firsthand. I'm not full of shit. I actually am. Yeah, I have a great deal of investment in these topics, and I am one of the only people on the planet that is putting their money where their mouth is. And I have a lot to lose.
I agree.
So much to lose. In fact,
right.
I have so much to lose by engaging these topics, as I've already witnessed. But I can't deny the truth. I can't unsee that which I've seen.
The way I articulate it, certainly, radically authentic, genuine, not afraid to say if you've interpreted something wrong, made a mistake. I love how Ron reacted to those photos. I thought that's what we need to see, because 97% of this is going to be bullshit. It's going to be a hoax. It's going to be misidentified,
or have a natural explanation. That's the thing.
Yeah,
the majority of what people see does have a natural, prosaic explanation. That's a fact, and it's a challenge to separate the signal from the noise. It takes an army of people. It takes a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach, and a spirit of discernment to be able to separate the signal from the noise and be able to focus on that which has validity and is really evidence-based. I think that using the scientific method and critical thinking is essential to getting to the bottom of the truth. And as my chief scientist always says, we are not led by an inherited narrative. We're not led by the books and the stories that have been told about decades past. We are led by the data. And we're going to continue to allow the data to lead and inform our investigation, and ultimately that which we will be revealing transparently to the general public. So thank you for having me on, you guys. And what a privilege
awesome.
To be part of this discussion and these topics.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I really appreciate you taking the time, man. Thank you so much.
You bet. Hey, carry on, and we'll look forward to great revelations ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. Take care.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.